There you go.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so everybody ready?
Sure.
First of all, good morning. My name is Frank Petrie with the law firm of Cotchett, Petrie, and McCarthy. And I'm with a team of what I consider to be some of the best lawyers in the state who have come here today to take the step of transparency. Frankly, we are outraged at the most recent PG&E submission, which captured a headline where PG&E seeks to shift and deflect blame to an unknown person based on unknown facts. That is not transparency in our view. That's secrecy. And frankly, we're tired of it. So we take this step today of filing a detailed complaint, which you have in front of you. It's nearly 50 pages, where we have taken the time to go through all of the various issues that we believe caused or contributed to this catastrophic event. The problem that we all feel is that this has been symptomatic of an all too frequent problem with PG&E, which is that there has been an organizational failure. An organizational failure to adequately inspect and maintain its facilities in light of what they know to be an aging infrastructure that is vulnerable to the very risk we saw occur here, a wildfire. Regrettably, it has been catastrophic events that have caused everybody to pay attention to what PG&E is not doing, to pay attention to the fact that they do not have an effective risk management process that is able to adequately and clearly uncover the risk of a wildfire, which they know is one of the monumental risks that they face in terms of their electrical transmission operations. This time, we have victims, including ex-Mayor Frank Jordan, and sitting at the end of the table, Greg and his wife, Christina Wilson. You know, they become victims because, once again, they're casualties of a corporate culture whose rhetoric does not meet their practices. It just seems that no amount of money that is spent for advertising, no amount of criminal convictions, including misleading the NTSB, seem to change a culture that puts profits in front of safety. The steps we take today are going to hope to pull back the curtain and to get at the truth. So what I want to do is I want to briefly just go through some of the background, some of which you're already aware of. There were a variety of fires that had occurred on October 8th and October 9th, resulting in 43 people killed, 200,000 acres destroyed, approximately 8,000 buildings and homes destroyed, and 100,000 residents that were displaced and had to find new places to live. I want to also point out that the standard by which PG&E is required to operate, PG&E is given a monopoly to provide electrical power to Northern California. And there is a mandate that the CPUC has, it's General Order 128, for their design and construction. And you'll note that the word is that they shall design, construct, and maintain their facilities for the conditions they will face. Those conditions include anticipated winds, which they've used as a scapegoat to conceal the problems that they had in their infrastructure and which, in our view, were causes of what happened. So just to give you a brief overview, in our view, there are three buckets for which the failures all fall. A failed vegetation management program, aging infrastructure, and a failure to modify their operations during the summer months, high fire season, to alter the manner in which reclosers are used to shut off power in the event of interruption with one of their electrical transmission lines. We know that on Sunday evening, October 8th, there were many calls and witness reports talking about equipment problems, transformer explosions, transformer fires, downed power lines, severed utility poles, arcing power lines, and flames in trees. PG&E has acknowledged that some of their lines came in contact with vegetation and were involved, yet they have chosen to suggest that this was all the result of wind. Through our investigation and through the allegations in our complaint, you will see that through our own investigators and our own evaluations, the winds that evening, at that time when the reports first came in, between 9:30, 9:45, 10 o'clock, the winds at that time were not uncommon. They were between 30 to 42 miles per hour. They were winds that properly maintained and inspected equipment and proper vegetation management controls would not have posed the problems that were encountered. PG&E was well aware that since 2004, there have been repeated instances when wind velocities much higher than experienced at that time, between the times 9 to 10 o'clock, were exceeded for this very same area. Winds at 45 miles an hour up to 60 miles an hour, as detailed in our complaint, were experienced in this very same area. Indeed, the winds that were encountered that evening were not only foreseeable, they were predictable. And this calamity was preventable. So I want to talk a little bit about the data points. We are not able at this stage to take a look at the evidence that has been collected by CAL FIRE or the evidence that PG&E has seen. It is only through taking the step of filing this lawsuit that we are going to be able to get access to what PG&E has seen and what CAL FIRE has seen. So we have had to work boots on the ground, our own investigation, and using publicly available information and witness accounts to try to piece together the puzzle that remains shrouded by PG&E. And it starts with knowing all the various points of origin and some fine work that has been done by the media in collecting information. And if I could go back to that prior slide, we were able to take a look at all of the various points from one of the media outlets that collected information about the various times, and as you can see as what's up behind me, notes of problems 923, 924 transformer explosion, 933 power lines down. We were able to use those data points and then superimpose on it, as we go to the next slide, where the locations, at least this relates to the Tubbs fire, which pinpointed ourselves a location at Highway 128 and Bennett Lane, which you see on the screen. But we didn't stop there. We were able to get at, we could just go to the slide you see up, you'll see that on the left, we were able to obtain, that was publicly available on the website, the calls for electric outages that PG&E had received. And you'll see that there was one that was received at 8:51 p.m. Cause, found damaged equipment on a power pole. Go over to the right-hand side. Electric outage details. At the same time, 8:51. Cause, fire in the area. Now you'll note that that call is 8:51. Simultaneous with a report of found damaged equipment on a power pole. If you go back to the preceding slide, excuse me, the PG&E response. You could go to that slide, right there. The article that we all saw and the report that was filed talks about somebody else's wires may have sparked a huge blaze, and it's based on a call or an incident at 9:45 p.m., not 8:51. Our concern is why. Now, we have serious concerns about relying on a company who has previously been convicted of misleading the NTSB. So we can't buy the credibility of a statement that they make that it's somebody else's wires. We want to see. 2, based on our investigation, and again, through the good work of some of you here in the media, and God bless you all, because with your media help, we're able to also move and get evaluated some of the things that we've seen. And one of the issues that has surfaced is this issue of reclosers and the issue of the Tubbs fire. Because there are some who want to say the Tubbs fire was caused by some third party that we don't know about and some unidentified facts. But what nobody wants to talk about on PG&E side is reclosers. Now we know, and you can see based on our slide, that 2 of the largest utility companies in this state recognize that during high fire season, based on the conditions of drought that has plagued this state for the last 5 years, that they reprogram reclosers, which are a device that when they're operating in their normal path, if there is an interruption of one of the electrical wires or the conductors, signals are sent back into those lines to restart them. And that prevents people from complaining about the inconvenience of having a power outage. Now, in the fire season, that is a danger that everybody recognizes, because as experienced by our brethren in Southern California and the utilities there, they understand that during the summer and high fire season, they reprogram the reclosers, so if there is an interruption, an interference with their electrical lines, it does not recharge. It powers down. PG&E doesn't do that. They made a deliberate choice not to follow industry standards, a deliberate choice in light of knowledge that during high fire season you are going to have high winds, You are going to have vegetation that is weakened by years of drought. So they expect and foresee that dried vegetation, high winds are going to come in contact with their lines and allow a system to keep recharging, increasing the risk of sparking and the risk of a wildfire. These are their decisions, and they know about the risk. If we could look at the next slide. Indeed, we found in 2015 at a congressional hearing a gentleman by the name of Patrick Hogan. He's the senior vice president of electrical operations, and he was speaking about the risks posed by reclosers during fire season. And you can see his words. You take the reliability hit, but you gain the wildfire benefit. So let's translate that. PG&E chose to accept the risk of loss of life and property because they wanted to save the cost of the inconvenience of sending people out when people complained of a power outage. Inconvenience, cost at the expense of life and property. This was their choice, not ours. And certainly not those who were the victims of this calamity. I'm going to turn this over now to Steve Campora, who's one of the lawyers that I'm privileged to work with on this case, who's going to talk a little bit about the Nuns fire, because there were some other cases that were filed today in addition to cases that were filed on behalf of ex-Mayor Jordan and Greg and his wife Christina Wilson. Steve? Sure.
That's a lot of mics. Can you maybe
We'll just switch over. Sure.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much. And slide right into those mics if you can.
How's that?
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
My name is Steve Campora. I'm with Dreyer Babbage, Bucola Wood, and Campora in Sacramento. As part of our work with these fine firms, we filed 2 complaints on behalf of this group today in Napa County for fires arising from the Atlas fire, and people were destroyed. And the issue that I really want to point out to you folks here today has to do with the vegetation management program and the issues that arise in that vegetation management program. We've given you a handout and is available online, PG&E's 2017 general rate case application. And in that rate case application, PG&E flatly states that they are accepting 0.02% contact with trees. 0.02% contact with trees. That means 20 out of 1,000 trees they'll accept as contact with their lines. And they understand that based on those numbers, they will have some fires. They understand that. That's a risk they're accepting, except they're not the ones that are really at risk. The people who are at risk are the people who live in Napa County, Sonoma County, Calaveras County, because when those fires occur, it's not PG&E's homes that are burned up. It's not PG&E's family members that are hurt and killed. PG&E ultimately, hopefully, will have to pay for that, but that's not who's at risk, and that's not who's being risked. So when we talk about the risk that's being accepted, PG&E is accepting that risk for others, and they're not even telling them. They're not even telling the public, look, they have an acknowledgement. If you put up the slide that says there's no level of, that says they have, on the vegetation management program, their policy says, with limited resources, PG&E cannot do everything and must decide at what point it is okay not to mitigate the risk further. Limited resources. At the same time, PG&E is earning $1.4 billion a year. They're saying they have limited resources and cannot further and will not further mitigate the risk. They spend in excess of $200 million a year on vegetation. they could spend more. If they doubled it, they would still make $1.2 billion a year. But instead of that, they're exposing the public to a risk that they know exists. PG&E does, by their own accord, an analysis of wildfire risk. It is the highest risk to their enterprise. They acknowledge it as the highest risk to their enterprise. They say vegetation management is mitigation of that risk. The problem is, when you say we're only going to go so far and we're going to leave some risk, 20 in 1,000 trees will come in contact with the line. Some wildfires will occur. Those are risks that are not acceptable when this is the result. Because every wildfire is a potential catastrophe. When Ms. Williams testifies about this, and it's in the handout you've gotten, she says, zero risk. We want zero risk. We aren't tolerating risk. That's not consistent with what they say in the CPUC filing. And they haven't told the public. I've seen all these commercials on TV about building California together. And have any of you ever seen a commercial that says, by the way, we're not going to finish the job on vegetation management. We're going to allow 0.02% of trees in contact, and we're going to have some wildfires. I haven't seen that commercial. So until they do what they need to do, the regulations don't say you have to maintain your lines except for 0.02%. They don't say you can have 20 out of 1,000 trees in contact with lines. That's not what the regulations say. So as long as they're willing to accept that, quote, risk, the public is in danger. And Khaldun is going to speak to the issues having to do with their antiquated infrastructure.
We can trade.
Thank you.
Let me slide into these mics for you.
Thank you, sir.
Good morning. My name is Khaldun Baghdadi. I'm a partner at Walkup Melodia in San Francisco, and it's my privilege to address you on behalf of our clients that we stand for and the other attorneys involved in this case whom we have the privilege of standing with. I just want to talk to you a little bit about the aging infrastructure. And when we talk about aging infrastructure, we're talking about unsafe infrastructure. The poles and the materials that PG&E is using to transmit these electrical lines. And the rule is clear under the general orders of the CPUC. You see a letter from the CPUC to PG&E regarding an audit that shows a total of 3,527 work orders that were completed past their scheduled date for corrective action. And the simple rule when it comes to delivering electricity is that safety should never be an option. Safety is imperative. Now, utility poles can age, and there's nothing wrong with utility poles aging, but they only become unsafe when a utility company and their contractors don't do their job in maintaining them. And one of the aspects of PG&E's conduct that we're investigating and that we're very concerned about is the integrity of the poles that are carrying these high voltage overhead conductors. This is the area of origin of the sulfur fire in Lake County in Clear Lake Oaks, California. Now, we've had people on the ground, cause and origin investigators, for ourselves. Now, CAL FIRE and PG&E have removed a lot of the evidence, but some evidence remains. What that left behind gives us some concern about whether PG&E has done the job it's supposed to do. Here's one of the other poles that remained out in that field in Lake County. I'm just going to approach that a little closer for you and ask you if you see something unusual there. You see it's riddled with what appear to be acorns or some other form of nut. Those holes have been created by rodents or birds. Those holes allow moisture to get into the pole and damage its integrity, make it weaker. Those holes in a utility pole that's job it is to hold up a high voltage power line can seriously damage the ability of that utility pole to do its job. And they can serve as a conduit for moisture, for fungus, and make that pole weaker. When it comes to a public utility, this isn't just any other sort of business. When safety is treated as an option, then the public takes the risk and the company gets all the benefit. And that's unacceptable. One of the several areas of concern that we have here is whether PG&E and the companies that it hired did their jobs that the law requires them to do in keeping this system safe and effective. Our investigation so far provides some very concerning pieces of that overall picture. The only way we can get the whole picture is by proceeding with discovery and trial, which is exactly what we plan to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelvin. Pardon me. I want to anticipate one of the things that you may hear from PG&E after they've had a chance to review our 50-page complaint and the details that are contained in it. And that is that they're going to want to talk about limited resources. The first thing that I want to say is that when they use the term limited resources, I want everybody to have context. This is a company that in the last 3 years has reported net income in excess, on average, of $1 billion. $1.45 billion in 2014, slightly under $900 million in 2015, and $1.4 billion in 2016. I want to put in context how much has been paid, if we go to the next slide, in executive compensation. This is money over and above salaries, and this only includes the top 7 or so executives at PG&E, and this is only for the time period 1999 to 2010, and you can see the number, $281 million. And that doesn't include the last 6 years. Our estimate is that it exceeds $300 million, for sure. So I want to just lay out that lack of resources is not an answer. But I want to underscore one other item. None of us here on this side of the table say that the answer to the problems is just to throw money at it. The answer to the problem, in our view, and one of the things we seek to accomplish by this lawsuit, is not merely the recovery of justice in terms of monetary compensation for our clients, but to effect change in how PG&E conducts its business. Anyone who knows the firms that are here who have previously been involved and done battle with PG&E for over the past 7 years understands that we're not just about seeking compensation for victims, we're about getting them to change their culture. One of the things that we want the public to know is that when it comes to their electrical side, to my knowledge, in the last 10 years, there has never been an independent organization that has come in to audit the safety programs for the electrical operations of PG&E to determine whether or not they have effective programs and processes to gauge the dangers presented by their aging infrastructure or the proper operation of their vegetation management programs. Nobody independent. PG&E grades itself. Now, the problem that we've seen from the San Bruno fire and explosion is that PG&E lives in a world of no bad news. They do nothing wrong. We want an independent review, not people hired by PG&E or the CPUC. We want an independent group of people, of the best professionals we can find, to go in and evaluate the programs that PG&E has, evaluate the expenditures that PG&E has made regarding their electrical operations to determine whether they're doing what they claim to be doing, which is to put safety first. So, in short, we hope that today's filing of the lawsuits on behalf of the lawyers that I'm privileged to work with is going to make that happen. It's not going to happen overnight. There's going to be a lot of work involved, and it's going to take a lot of time, a lot of resources, and a lot of committed people, which everybody who's part of this group has made a commitment to do. At this point, I'd like to introduce to you a wonderful friend and lawyer who has a passion and commitment to this case, Mike Kelly.
Thank
Mike.
you, Frank. So, my name is Mike Kelly. I have practiced here in San Francisco in the Bay Area for 40 years. In my experience, this group of lawyers that has come together to find transparency and to represent people like Greg Wilson and his wife is unprecedented. All of us through the years have had experience dealing with PG&E, whether for wildland fires, grass fires, transformer fires. And really what we have seen, and the tragedy of San Bruno is the best example, is trying to fix things through public relations. But you don't prevent fires and you don't prevent tragedies by spending money on positive PR so people will like you. If you look at the complaint, you'll see that all of the homework and all of the things that these law firms have discovered, that we have discovered in our litigation, it's a recurring theme, and I think Frank and Steve and Khaldun have done a very good job of laying it on the line. We've seen after San Bruno all of the commercials that say, "Trust us, we are good people." And I have to say, we all have good friends and neighbors who work for PG&E, but we don't see the managers saying we're going to spend the money to do the hard work. And the hard work wasn't done. And so people are out of their houses. People are out of jobs. Kids are out of school. And this is not a 30 or 60 or 90-day problem. This is a 2, 3, or 4-year odyssey for people who have sustained losses that they're never going to recover from. And so I think our message is the reason you file a 50-page complaint is to say, we are serious. We know how you have behaved. We're not going to accept it. And this isn't going to happen again. When you turn on your electricity, you don't have a choice. It's not like buying an automobile. You don't get to choose between a Chevrolet or a Ford or a Volvo. You get PG&E, and they get your bill, you get their bill, they get the money every month. Right? And what you get, or what we should get, on the other side of that is responsibility and safety and being proactive and doing the right thing. We shouldn't get commercials that say, we're good people, trust us. It's hard to trust somebody who doesn't do the hard work and fix things before people die and are burned and lose their houses and have their lives turned upside down. This is the first time I have been involved in a piece of litigation where what I consider to be the 4 best law firms in Northern California that do this work got together and say, okay, let's fix this, let's fix it right, let's do it once, let's not have it happen again. That's what this is about. And I know, Frank, you had invited Greg here, so I think it's much more important to talk to Greg because his story is real and it's compelling and it's an example of the literally hundreds of phone calls each of us has received not just from potential clients, but from friends and from neighbors and from real people who are the ones who have suffered through this.
Thank you, Mike. Greg? If we could hit the next slide, next one. The slide that you see up here is a comparison slide between Greg and Christina's home on the left before and the destruction after. Greg is going to talk to you just a bit about what happened to him and Christina, and he's still suffering from the effects of what happened. His voice has been ravaged as a result of what went on, so he'll speak very softly. So, Greg, you're going to have to speak softly into the mic.
Sorry. Hi, my name is Gregory Wilson. My wife can't be here. We also had a dog, and he became blinded by the fire, so she's back taking care of the dog right now. What happened was we basically jumped in the pool to survive, and basically for the next 3 hours, we watched everything burn around us, and many times had to jump into dive underwater with the superheated air and embers flying over us. It's a nightmare that you can't even imagine. You know, it's and like Frank and the other guys have said, like, we're hoping that they can shed light on this thing so that nobody ever has to go through something like this, and also that, you know, nobody will ever have to die. So it was just, I can't really speak too much longer. The voice isn't so great. So I mean, that's kind of all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg.
Mr. Wilson, did your voice, is that an injury from the fire, because of the fire?
I think so. Yeah, it
Have you
probably.
not had a voice since then?
I haven't had a voice since then. Yeah.
Greg and his wife were in the ICU at UCSF for about 10 days after this because of problems with smoke inhalation, burns about the body. Thank God that he's doing well and moving toward recovery, but the voice is an aftermath of what happened. So that concludes at least our presentation. If there are questions, we'll briefly take some questions and then have you move on about other business.
Yeah, I'm Maureen Kelly from Encore News. Can I ask, I mean, this seems a little premature considering that there has been no cause release of any of these fires. Can you talk about that?
Well, that's the reason why we took this step, is that, you know, we've had secrecy, nothing but secrecy, since...
We need to switch on.
Sure.
Sorry. Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, the question was, isn't this step premature? Not at all. You know, you want an example of premature. This is premature. PG&E, someone else's wires may have sparked huge blaze, and they provide us no facts. That's premature. The reason we take this step is because we're tired of this. We're tired of the cloud of secrecy that shrouds everything that PG&E does. PG&E says they want to be transparent, but then they do this. The only way that we can get behind the cloud and the curtain and veil of secrecy is to file a lawsuit and come forward with what we know. We've detailed in 50 pages all the facts we're aware of regarding our belief, our opinion at this point in time of why this fire started and what the decisions were made by PG&E leadership that led to this fire. We're being transparent. Now, if somebody says we're wrong, you come to us and you lay your evidence out on the table, which they have not done. But we're not going to wait around for the CPUC and CAL FIRE and PG&E to have them tell us what they think was done wrong. We want our investigators, we want our experts to look at the evidence, and we want to draw our own conclusions to get at the truth. Jackson.
Why are you so sure that they left their reclosers on? PG&E hasn't provided a response to that at this point. They say the equipment worked as intended. What, do you have any evidence to show that those were left on?
Well, it worked as intended, as you know, Jackson, meant that the way that they have the system designed is that those reclosers continue to provide impulses through the wires when they sense an interruption. So if it's working as intended, it means they've never changed it. So our assumption, our working assumption, is that those reclosers were operational in the manner in which PG&E intended, which is not to shut off in the event of interruption and to keep sending pulses through the wires. So if PG&E says that they have changed that and they provide us with proof, we'll take a look at it. But remember, this fire at Tubbs wasn't just related to what happened on Bennett Lane. That was one data point. There are a number of data points. There are a number of different initiations of fire in the Tubbs fire. And we have to look at all of them. That's why if you look at our complaint focuses on a number of avenues, a variety of contributing forces that all came together to lead to the calamity that occurred the evening of October 8th. Steve?
Well, we also know.
You got to talk over here.
Okay.
Sorry to keep making you do this.
That's okay. Jackson, we also know from the Butte fire that the reclosers were not turned off, and then in fact were working at the time of the Butte fire, which was September of 2015. So there's no indication. Some of them can be done manually, some of them otherwise. There's no indication that they've changed the reclosers in Northern California.
As a follow-up, when you talk about vegetation management practices, you discovered some things in Butte in that litigation about PG&E's practices, about their audits. Are you going to ask, or are you guys wanting to see how PG&E's audit happened in the area hit by this fire? And have you had much trouble getting these audits in the past? I mean, they don't seem to be public documents.
Well, they are now available. The ones from the Butte fire are available. We're going to be obviously asking for the audits, so you all know. PG&E has a program where a person from PG&E goes out after contractors have gone through and goes through the area and looks for trees that are not compliant and looks for what they call facility protect trees, which are trees that are tall enough to reach the line and have some indication they might fall into the line. Unfortunately, even though they say they do a statistically significant sample for the audit, for example, if they find 13 facility protect trees in the segments that they audit, they could extrapolate that into how many actually exist in the area, but they don't do that. They try to fix the ones they find, but even though they know, based on statistical information, that if they found 13, there may be 1,000, they don't go look for those 1,000 trees. So that's a problem in their system. They also have some statistical problems with the way they do it. It's not done in a completely valid manner. But those things, according to PG&E, last I spoke to them, they hadn't made any changes in the system, so I have to assume that's the way they're still doing it.
And you talk about transparency. I'm just trying to figure out what exactly do you want PG&E to do? They claim they have a world-class vegetation management program. They inspect their trees, and they're using the CAL FIRE sees this equipment. What do you want them to do?
Well, here's a classic example of transparency. The document they filed with the CPUC, the General Rate Case 2017, page 2-12, specifically says we are not going to spend the money to eliminate the risk, or words to that effect. None of you knew that before today. Why doesn't the public know that? Why isn't PG&E raising their hand and say, guys, for those of you who live out in the area where there's trees and grass where our lines are, be aware, we aren't going to spend the money to eliminate that risk. That's not transparency. That's putting people in danger and then not even warning them. That's the kind of conduct we can't tolerate.
If I could, Steve. Jackson, the word transparency means that you have to have somebody who is credible and truthful. Our concern is that PG&E, under the guise of transparency, says whatever it needs to say to save themselves. As we all know, when the NTSB asked PG&E after the San Bruno fire and explosion whether they had ever spiked their lines, they told the NTSB that they had a draft policy that talked about spiking, but they never did it. It wasn't until people started to cross-examine those folks under oath where we found out that they did have such a practice. That's not the kind of transparency that I want. The transparency I want, and that everybody here on this table wants, is we want to have independent people come in. If PG&E lauds itself as having the finest vegetation management program in the country, then they should welcome an independent panel of experts chosen by anybody other than them or the CPUC to go in and inspect their practices and evaluate whether the processes they say they have on paper are actually working in the field. Unfortunately, it's only until those people are subject to cross-examination that you get to the truth. And that's why filing a lawsuit and confronting people with the tough questions when they're under oath is the only way to get at the real truth, to be able to implement what's necessary to prevent this from happening again. That's what motivates the people on this side of this table. That's what brings us in contact with Greg to achieve what he wants. We don't want another family to go through what Greg went through ever again. Okay, I think we got it. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you all for coming down.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.